officer. For a brake light violation, you don't have authority to order me out of the vehicle unless you have reasonable suspicion of another crime.
Excuse me? I'm giving you a lawful order.
A broken brake light is an equipment violation. MIMS allows you to order me out, but not without a reasonable cause. What's your justification?
My justification is that I'm a police officer and you need to do what I...
Officer Grant Walker thought this would be just another Tuesday afternoon traffic stop. Pull someone over, flash the badge, maybe run a quick search if he felt like it. He'd done it 1,000 times before, and it always went the same way. People got nervous. They handed over whatever he asked for. They didn't ask questions. But the woman sitting calmly behind the wheel of that silver Honda wasn't like the others. She'd spent the last 12 years teaching law students how to dismantle bad police work in courtrooms. She could recite Fourth Amendment precedent the way most people recite song lyrics, and her dash cam was capturing every single mistake he was about to make. By the time this encounter ended, 18 minutes later, Walker would be looking at termination papers, a federal lawsuit, and the complete destruction of his 14-year career. This wasn't just a traffic stop gone wrong. This was about to become required viewing in police academies across the country as the perfect example of what happens when you mess with someone who actually knows the law. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, I need to ask you something. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your country or state in the comments below. And if you appreciate stories about people who stand up for their rights and know the law, please hit that subscribe button. This story is about to get intense and you won't want to miss a single moment. Thank you. Keisha Randall was 41 years old and had spent the last 12 years teaching constitutional law at Georgetown University. But here's the thing. She wasn't one of those professors who'd gone straight from law school to the classroom. She'd spent 7 years in the trenches first, handling real cases, civil rights litigation, unlawful search defenses, police reform, work with the ACLU. She didn't just lecture about Fourth Amendment violations from a textbook. She'd actually fought them in court and won. She knew exactly how cops were trained, what tactics they used, and most importantly, where they consistently screwed up. Keisha was driving home from a conference in Philadelphia where she had presented a paper on police accountability and qualified immunity. It was a Saturday afternoon, traffic was light, and she was in a good mood. She had her music playing, her cruise control set at exactly the speed limit, and she was looking forward to getting home. She wasn't doing anything that would justify being pulled over. Nothing at all. Her car was a 2020 Honda Accord. It was well maintained, recently inspected, and had no mechanical issues. The brake lights worked perfectly. She knew this because she had specifically checked them 2 days earlier when she noticed someone had bumped her car in a parking lot. Both brake lights had been functioning normally. When those lights started flashing behind her, Keisha's first reaction wasn't fear. It was annoyance, mixed with a very specific kind of recognition. She knew what this was. She'd seen it play out in dozens of cases she'd worked on. The pretextual stop, the made-up violation, the escalation that would follow when she didn't immediately fold. And yeah, she knew exactly what demographic pattern was probably driving this encounter. Black woman, nice car, driving alone. She'd literally written academic papers analyzing this exact scenario. Keisha pulled over carefully, signaled, and came to a complete stop on the shoulder. She turned off her engine, placed both hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, and waited. Her dash cam was already recording. She had installed it 6 months earlier specifically because of situations like this. The camera faced forward but also captured audio from inside the car. Everything that was about to happen would be documented. Officer Grant Walker was 39 years old with 14 years on the Maryland State Police. And if you looked at his record, which people eventually would, you'd see some interesting patterns. His traffic stops skewed heavily toward black drivers, like statistically impossible to explain by coincidence heavily. Those stops also ran longer, got more invasive, and somehow he always seemed to detect odors or observe suspicious behavior that justified searches. But nobody had actually sat down and crunched those numbers yet. Nobody had connected the dots. He'd been doing this for over a decade, and the system had just let it slide. That was about to change in a major way. Walker approached the driver's side window with the kind of swagger that came from years of people complying immediately with whatever he said. He expected this to be quick. Flash the badge, claim some violation, maybe search the car if he felt like it, and send her on her way with a warning and a reminder of who was in charge. That's how it usually went. Keisha rolled down her window halfway, just enough to communicate, not enough to give unnecessary access to her vehicle. License and registration, Walker said. Not good afternoon, not do you know why I stopped you, just a demand. Keisha kept her voice calm and professional. I'd like to know why you pulled me over first. Please. Walker's expression shifted slightly. Most people didn't ask questions first. Most people just handed over their documents. Your brake light is out, he said. Keisha knew immediately this was false. Which one? The left one? Officer, I checked my brake lights 2 days ago. Both were working. Is it possible you're mistaken? Walker's jaw tightened. Step out of the vehicle. And there it was. The escalation. The attempt to turn a supposed equipment violation into something more. Keisha had seen this pattern 100 times in cases she'd worked on. Officer makes a questionable stop, driver asks reasonable questions, officer gets defensive and escalates. Here's a question, and be honest in the comments. Have you ever been pulled over for something you absolutely knew wasn't real? Yes or no? Just drop it below. For a brake light violation, you don't have authority to order me out of the vehicle unless you have reasonable suspicion of another crime, Keisha said calmly. Walker leaned down closer to the window. His voice got harder. Excuse me? I'm giving you a lawful order. Keisha maintained her composure. A brake light is an equipment violation. Under Pennsylvania v. Mims, you can order me out during a traffic stop, but that doesn't mean every request is reasonable under the Fourth Amendment. What's your reasonable suspicion that I'm engaged in criminal activity beyond this alleged equipment violation? The mention of case law stopped Walker cold. Most people he pulled over didn't cite Supreme Court decisions. Most people didn't differentiate between what officers could theoretically do and what the Constitution actually allowed. My justification is that I'm a police officer and you need to do what I say, Walker said, his voice rising slightly. That's not how the law works, Keisha replied, her tone remaining steady. I'm Professor Keisha Randall. I teach constitutional law at Georgetown University, and right now you're violating my Fourth Amendment rights. If you have reasonable suspicion of criminal activity, please articulate it. Otherwise, you need to either issue me a citation for the alleged brake light violation or let me go. I don't care if you're the president, Walker said, his hand moving to his duty belt. Get out of the car. Now, Keisha noticed the hand movement. She noticed the elevated voice. She noticed the lack of any legal justification. And she made a decision. My dash cam is recording this entire encounter. Officer, she said clearly, making sure her voice was captured on audio. Badge number 3429. Everything you're saying is being documented, so I'll ask again, what is your reasonable suspicion that justifies ordering me from my vehicle for an equipment violation? The silence that followed lasted about 5 seconds. 5 seconds where Walker stood there, trying to figure out how to handle someone who actually knew the law, someone who wasn't intimidated, someone who was documenting everything. You're being uncooperative, he finally said. No, sir. I'm asserting my constitutional rights. There's a significant difference. If you believe my brake light is out, you can issue me a citation. I'll sign it and be on my way. But I'm not exiting my vehicle without reasonable suspicion of criminal activity, and you haven't articulated any. Walker's face was getting red now. You know what? I think I smell marijuana. Step out of the vehicle. Keisha's expression didn't change, but inside she was noting every word. The manufactured probable cause, the attempt to create justification after the fact. This was textbook Fourth Amendment violation, and it was all being recorded. Officer, I don't use marijuana. I haven't smoked anything. There's no marijuana in this vehicle. What you're doing right now is creating false probable cause to justify an illegal search, and it's all being documented. Are you calling me a liar? Walker demanded, his voice loud enough now that passing cars could probably hear him. I'm saying that you're claiming to smell something that doesn't exist in order to manufacture probable cause for a search you have no legal basis to conduct. Those are facts, not accusations. Now I want to know what you think about something. Should Keisha have just gotten out of the car to avoid making things worse? Drop your take in the comments. Walker pulled out his radio. Send backup to mile marker 73 on I-95 northbound. I have an uncooperative driver refusing to exit the vehicle. Keisha heard the radio call and knew exactly what was happening. Walker was trying to turn this into a bigger situation, hoping that the presence of more officers would intimidate her into compliance. It was another tactic she had seen in dozens of cases. Officer, I'm not being uncooperative. I'm exercising my Fourth Amendment rights. You stopped me for an alleged equipment violation. You've provided no reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. You've manufactured a claim about smelling marijuana that's demonstrably false, and now you're calling for backup to intimidate me into consenting to an illegal search. All of this is being recorded, and all of it will be presented in the complaint I file with your department and potentially in federal court. The words federal court seemed to register. Walker took a step back from the vehicle. His face was still red, but something in his demeanor changed. Maybe he was starting to realize this wasn't going the way he expected. Maybe he was starting to understand that this woman actually knew what she was talking about. Within 3 minutes, 2 more patrol cars arrived. 2 officers got out and approached. Their names were Officer Jennifer Cole and Officer Thomas Vega. Both had been with the state police for several years. Both immediately recognized that something about this stop didn't look right. "What's the situation?" Cole asked Walker. "Driver won't exit the vehicle," Walker said. "Stopped her for a brake light violation. She's being uncooperative. I detected the odor of marijuana." Cole walked to the back of Keisha's vehicle and looked at the brake lights. Then she walked back to Walker. "Both brake lights are working," she said quietly. Walker's face went pale. "What?" "Both lights are functional. I can see them clearly." Keisha, still sitting in her vehicle with her hands on the wheel, spoke through the partially open window. "Officer Cole, is it? Thank you for verifying. I'm Professor Keisha Randall from Georgetown Law. I was pulled over for what Officer Walker claimed was a broken brake light. When I asked for his reasonable suspicion to order me from the vehicle, he couldn't provide one. When I informed him I was exercising my Fourth Amendment rights, he claimed to smell marijuana, which doesn't exist in this vehicle. This entire encounter has been recorded on my dash cam." Cole and Vega exchanged a look. They both knew what they were dealing with: a bad stop, an officer who had escalated unnecessarily, a driver who happened to know the law better than the officer who stopped her. "Ma'am," Cole said, her tone completely different from Walker's, "I apologize for the confusion. Are you willing to have me verify that there's no marijuana odor in the vehicle?" Keisha considered this. Cole seemed reasonable, and Keisha knew that allowing a brief investigation might actually help her case. If multiple officers documented that there was no marijuana, it would further demonstrate that Walker had fabricated probable cause. "Officer Cole, I'll consent to you approaching my window and making that determination. But I'm only consenting to that specific action. I'm not consenting to any search of my person or vehicle." Cole approached the window carefully and professionally. She leaned in slightly, took a breath, and stepped back. "Ma'am, I don't detect any odor of marijuana or any other controlled substance." Keisha nodded. "Thank you, officer. Can you please document that in your report?" Cole turned to Walker. "We need to talk," she said, her voice low but firm. The 3 officers walked back toward their vehicles. Keisha couldn't hear what they were saying, but she could see the body language. Cole was doing most of the talking. Walker was defensive, his hands gesturing. Vega was standing with his arms crossed, shaking his head. The conversation lasted about 4 minutes. Then Cole walked back to Keisha's vehicle alone. "Professor Randall," Cole said through the window, "I'm very sorry for how this stop was conducted. You're free to go. No citation will be issued. If you wish to file a complaint about this encounter, you can contact the Maryland State Police Internal Affairs Division. The number is on the back of my card." She handed Keisha her business card through the window. "I appreciate your professionalism, Officer Cole," Keisha said, accepting the card. "I will be filing a complaint, and I'll be requesting all dashcam and body camera footage from this stop through a public records request." "That's absolutely your right, ma'am. Drive safely." Keisha started her engine, checked her mirrors, and pulled back onto the interstate. The entire encounter had lasted 18 minutes. 18 minutes that were about to cost Officer Grant Walker everything. Keisha didn't wait until she got home. She pulled off at the next rest stop and immediately sent 3 emails. One to the Maryland State Police Internal Affairs Division with a detailed account of what happened. One to her attorney, who specialized in civil rights cases, and one to the ACLU of Maryland, which she had worked with before on police accountability issues. She also uploaded the dashcam footage to a secure cloud storage service and made several backup copies. She had learned from experience that evidence had a way of disappearing when it was inconvenient for law enforcement. By Monday morning, her complaint had reached the desk of Captain Robert Nolan, who supervised the unit that included Walker, Cole, and Vega. Captain Nolan was a 30-year veteran who had seen a lot of things, but when he watched Keisha's dashcam footage, he knew immediately this was serious. The video showed everything. Walker's stop based on a false claim, his inability to articulate reasonable suspicion, his attempt to order Keisha from the vehicle without justification, his fabrication of marijuana odor to create probable cause, his call for backup to intimidate a driver who was lawfully asserting her rights. It was, as Keisha had said, textbook Fourth Amendment violation. Captain Nolan called Walker into his office that afternoon. "Tell me about the stop on Saturday," Nolan said, his voice neutral. Walker went through his version. He said he saw a brake light out, said the driver was uncooperative, said he smelled marijuana, said he felt the situation required backup for his safety. "Did you see the brake lights after you initiated the stop?" Nolan asked. "I saw one was out when she was driving," Walker said. Officer Cole documented that both brake lights were fully functional, Nolan said. How do you explain that? Walker hesitated. Maybe it was intermittent? Nolan played the dash cam footage. They both watched as Walker claimed to smell marijuana after Keisha refused to exit the vehicle. They watched as Cole verified there was no marijuana odor. When it was over, Nolan asked, "Did you smell marijuana?" Another hesitation. "I thought I did." "You thought you did, or you said you did to create probable cause after the driver refused to comply with an unlawful order?" Walker said nothing. "You're suspended, effective immediately," Nolan said, "pending a full investigation. Hand over your badge and weapon. If you think that suspension was completely justified, type deserved in the comments right now." The investigation took 8 weeks. Internal Affairs pulled all of Walker's traffic stops from the past 3 years. They analyzed the data. They found the pattern that should have been caught years earlier. Walker stopped black drivers at 3 times the expected rate. Those stops lasted 40% longer on average. He requested to search vehicles driven by black drivers 5 times more often than vehicles driven by white drivers, and in 70% of those searches, he found nothing. They interviewed Keisha, they interviewed Cole and Vega, they reviewed dashcam footage from multiple stops, they brought in an independent expert on racial profiling and traffic enforcement. The expert's report was devastating. It concluded that Walker's stop patterns were statistically impossible to explain by chance. The disparity was so significant that it could only be explained by bias, either conscious or unconscious. The report used Keisha's stop as a case study in how officers manufacture probable cause when initial stops don't yield the results they're looking for. The Internal Affairs recommendation was termination. The report cited violation of department policy, violation of constitutional rights, false statements in the line of duty, and a pattern of racially discriminatory enforcement. Walker was fired 12 weeks after the stop. He appealed through his union, but the appeal was denied. The evidence was too clear, the pattern was too obvious. The dashcam footage from Keisha's stop made it impossible to argue he had done nothing wrong. But Keisha wasn't done. She filed a federal lawsuit under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, the civil rights statute that allows citizens to sue government officials for constitutional violations. Her attorney was Michael Chen, one of the best civil rights lawyers in Maryland. The lawsuit named Walker individually and the Maryland State Police as an organization. The lawsuit alleged racial profiling, Fourth Amendment violations, fabrication of probable cause, and supervisor liability for failing to address Walker's pattern of discriminatory stops, despite having data that should have raised red flags. The State Attorney General's office reviewed the case. They watched the dashcam footage. They read the Internal Affairs report. They looked at the statistical analysis. They calculated what a jury would likely award if this case went to trial. A law professor, calm and professional, citing case law while an officer fabricated probable cause. The jury verdict would be substantial. The publicity would be worse. They settled 6 months after the lawsuit was filed. The settlement amount was confidential, but sources familiar with the negotiations said it was in the low 6 figures. More importantly, the settlement required the Maryland State Police to implement comprehensive reforms, mandatory training on racial bias in traffic enforcement, regular audits of stop data to identify officers with problematic patterns, a new requirement that officers document specific articulable facts for every stop, an early warning system to flag officers before patterns became as extreme as Walker's. Keisha donated half of her settlement to organizations that provide legal education and support to communities disproportionately targeted by law enforcement. She used the rest to fund a research project on police accountability mechanisms. The dashcam footage from her stop became famous in legal circles. It was shown in law school classes on constitutional law and criminal procedure. It was used in police academy training as an example of what not to do. Civil rights organizations used it in Know Your Rights workshops. One law professor at Howard University called it the most perfect example of Fourth Amendment assertion he had ever seen. Every element was there: the pretextual stop, the lack of reasonable suspicion, the manufactured probable cause, the calm assertion of rights, and the complete documentation of the violation. So what's your biggest takeaway from all this? Drop it in the comments. I'm curious what stuck with you most. Keisha continued teaching at Georgetown. She became even more sought after as an expert on police accountability. She testified before the Maryland legislature on proposed reforms to traffic stop procedures. She consulted with police departments trying to address racial disparities in their enforcement patterns. Her students knew the story, of course. It became legendary on campus. Professor Randall, who didn't just teach constitutional law, but lived it, who stood up for her rights even when it would have been easier and safer to comply, who turned one traffic stop into a catalyst for systemic change. Grant Walker never worked in law enforcement again. The termination for cause made it nearly impossible to get hired by another department. He eventually moved out of state and took a job in private security. Some people who followed the case felt bad for him. A 14-year career ended because of one stop. But it wasn't one stop. It was hundreds of stops over years. It was a pattern of behavior that violated the rights of countless people who didn't have Keisha's knowledge or resources to fight back. The reforms implemented by the Maryland State Police had real effects. Traffic stop data from the year following the reforms showed a significant reduction in racial disparities. Stop times became more uniform across demographics. The rate of searches decreased overall, particularly searches that yielded no evidence. Complaint rates went down because officers knew they were being monitored more carefully. None of those changes would have happened without Keisha's stop. Without her knowledge of the law, without her calm refusal to be intimidated, without her dash cam documenting everything, without her willingness to file a complaint and follow through with a lawsuit. 3 years after the stop, Keisha was invited to speak at a conference on police reform. In her speech, she talked about how rights only mean something if people know they have them and are willing to assert them. She talked about how documentation is crucial because the system often favors the word of officers over citizens. She talked about how individual cases of standing up to injustice can create ripples that lead to broader change. She also acknowledged the privilege that allowed her to assert her rights. She had education, resources, legal knowledge, and professional status that provided some protection. Many people don't have those advantages. They can't afford attorneys. They don't know case law. They're afraid of what might happen if they push back. That's why systemic reform is so important, she said. People shouldn't need a law degree to have their rights respected. The location where Keisha was stopped, mile marker 73 on I-95, became something of a landmark among people who knew the story. The spot where a law professor gave a police officer an education in constitutional law. The place where someone who knew their rights refused to back down. The moment that was captured on video and changed policy. Officer Jennifer Cole, who had verified the brake lights were working and documented that there was no marijuana odor, received a commendation for her professional handling of a difficult situation. She later became a training officer and used Keisha's case as a teaching example in her classes. This is what happens when we don't follow procedure, she would tell new recruits. This is why we need to know the law as well as the people we're stopping. The dashcam footage has been viewed millions of times online. The comment sections are always interesting. Some people praise Keisha for knowing her rights. Others say she should have just complied. Some focus on Walker's actions. Others talk about broader systemic issues. But everyone who watches it learns something about how traffic stops work and what rights people have during those encounters. If this story hit you the way it hit me when I first heard about it, do me a favor and share it. Send it to your family. Send it to anyone who drives. Send it to anyone who's ever felt powerless when those lights started flashing behind them. These stories matter, and they don't get told enough. Make sure you're subscribed because I've got more of these lined up. Real stories, real consequences, real people who decided they weren't going to just roll over. Click that button and drop a comment. I actually want to know, could you have stayed as calm as Keisha did in that situation? Could you have cited case law while some cop is standing at your window getting angrier by the second? Let me know. Thanks for sticking with this one all the way to the end. Seriously, the fact that you're still here tells me you actually care about this stuff, and that matters more than you know. Here's what Keisha's story really comes down to. Knowing your rights is only half of it. The other half is having the spine to actually use that knowledge when it counts. Most people fold, she didn't. And because she didn't, an entire system had to change. Catch you in the next one.